On an unexpected night, a millionaire gets the biggest scare of his life when a little beggar suddenly jumps in front of his car and faints on the sidewalk. Desperate, he runs to help the girl, and upon seeing her regain consciousness, is surprised. When she whispers something in his ear, the child's words bring to light a secret from the past, so deep that it makes the millionaire break down in tears right there. The reason for that gesture is so impactful that it leaves him completely shocked. The light rain turned the city streets into dark mirrors, reflecting the neon lights of commercial buildings that rose like sleeping giants. Edward Mendez adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie as he sped his Mercedes-Benz through the bustling avenues, his fingers drumming impatiently on the leather steering wheel. The dashboard clock read 11:40 p.m. He was late for the most important meeting of his business career. At 45, Edward had built a real estate empire that spanned 3 states. His company, Mendez and Associates, was synonymous with luxury and exclusivity in the high-end market. Tonight, he would finally close the deal that would make him the biggest developer in the metropolitan area. $100 million in foreign investments awaited only his signature. The designer navy blue suit fit his athletic frame perfectly, maintained by rigorous personal training sessions. His graying temples lent him a distinction that impressed in the most sophisticated business circles. Edward was known for his calculating shrewdness and his ability to turn every opportunity into substantial profit. His cell phone rang for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. It was Marcus, his business partner for over a decade. "Edward, where are you? The Japanese investors are getting impatient. This meeting can't be postponed again." "I'm almost there, Marcus. 5 minutes and I'll be there. Keep them entertained with that sustainability presentation we prepared." Edward hung up without waiting for a reply and pressed harder on the accelerator. The streets were beginning to empty, typical for that time on a weeknight. Only a few hurried pedestrians walked along the wet sidewalks, sheltered by umbrellas swaying in the wind. Park Avenue stretched before him like a pulsating artery of the metropolis. Edward knew every curve, every traffic light, every shortcut that could shave precious minutes off his journey. His mind was already in the boardroom, visualizing contracts being signed, handshakes sealing multi-million-dollar deals. As he approached East 50th Street, a particularly poorly lit corner caught his attention. The streetlights had failed on that block, creating a gloom that contrasted with the brightness of the main avenues. Edward instinctively slowed down, his business reflexes always alert to any anomaly in the environment. That's when she appeared. A small, fragile figure emerged from the shadows like a ghost of the night. Edward first saw the bare feet, then the tiny silhouette of a child who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her disheveled hair swayed as she staggered towards the street, as if in a trance. Time seemed to freeze. Edward slammed on the brakes with all his might, feeling the tires skid on the wet asphalt. The Mercedes ABS worked perfectly, but the businessman's heart pounded like a war drum. The distance between the bumper and the girl was less than 2 feet. She fell. There was no impact, but the scare was enough for her small legs to give way. The child collapsed on the sidewalk like a rag doll, her thin arms spread out on the cold concrete. Edward jumped out of the car before even fully engaging the parking brake. "Oh my God, oh my God!" The words came out like a desperate prayer as he knelt beside the unconscious girl. His trembling hands touched her wrist, searching for vital signs. Her heart was beating faintly but regularly. She was alive. Edward felt tears welling in his eyes, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with the aroma of his expensive French cologne, creating a strange combination he would never forget. A few pedestrians began to approach, forming a small circle around the scene. Edward barely noticed them. All his attention was focused on that fragile child, dressed in tattered clothes that had once been white, but now bore the marks of a life on the streets. Suddenly, her eyes opened. Edward had never seen eyes so deep, so laden with history and suffering. For a moment, they stared at each other in absolute silence. Then, her voice whispered something that would change his life forever. "Mr. Edward." The girl's voice was just a wisp of breath, but each word pierced the businessman's chest. Like a sharp blade. "You saved my family on Church Street 2 years ago." Edward felt the world spin around him. Church Street, how could he forget? 2 years ago, on a rainy afternoon, much like this night, he had stopped his car upon seeing a family being evicted from a simple house. A young woman was crying desperately while holding a small child in her arms, begging for a few more days to gather the rent money. At that time, Edward still carried traces of the compassion he had inherited from his mother. Without hesitation, he had paid not only the overdue rent, but 3 months in advance, plus left enough money for the family to regroup. He did it anonymously, asking only that the landlord not mention his name. "Today, the bad men want to get you after the bridge." The girl continued whispering, her words broken by irregular breathing. "Please, don't go." Edward felt a shiver run down his spine. The bridge. She was referring to the overlooked bridge, the route he always took to get to his office after this corner. His eyes filled with tears as the reality of the situation began to form in his mind. "How do you know my name?" he asked in a choked voice, still kneeling beside the child. "How did you know I'd be passing by here?" The girl tried to sit up, propping herself on her elbows. Edward helped her gently, noticing how light she was, almost too fragile to exist. "I live on the streets, mister. I see everything. I heard them talking about the man in the blue suit who was going to pass by here tonight. They said they were going to grab you after the bridge." The child's words echoed in Edward's mind like alarm bells. He looked around, observing the shadows cast by the buildings, the dark corners where anyone could be hiding. Fear began to settle in his chest, mixing with guilt and confusion. "Who are they?" Edward asked, his voice now firmer, the business instinct to seek information taking over. "Men from the neighborhood. They say you have a lot of money and that you need to pay for something bad you did." The girl wiped her nose with the back of her dirty hand. "But I remember you, mister. You're not bad. You saved us." Edward felt his chest tighten. In recent years, he had become increasingly cold, focused only on business. He had fired employees without hesitation, bought land in low-income communities, forcing families to move, always justifying his actions as necessary for progress. Perhaps his wealth had created enemies who now sought revenge. The cell phone rang. Again. Marcus, surely. Edward looked at the device, then at the girl, then at the illuminated bridge in the distance. For the first time in years, money didn't seem to be the most important priority in his life. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Mia Louise. But everyone calls me Mia." She smiled for the first time, revealing small, imperfect teeth, but the most genuine smile Edward had seen in a long time. "Mia, where's your mother?" Tears returned to the girl's eyes. "She's real sick, mister. Since she lost her job, we've been living on the streets. She stays in a safe place, away from the bad men." Edward looked at the bridge again. His Japanese investors were waiting. $100 million depended on that meeting. But for the first time in his adult life, Edward Mendez considered that perhaps there were things more important than money. The sound of footsteps echoing on the wet sidewalk made them both turn. 3 figures were approaching, walking slowly, their silhouettes stark against the city lights. Edward felt his blood run cold. "Mister, it's them," Mia whispered, gripping the businessman's arm with surprising strength for someone so small. Edward didn't hesitate. In a swift movement, he scooped Mia into his arms and ran towards the Mercedes. The girl was even lighter than he had imagined, her thin arms wrapping around his neck as if her life depended on that embrace. The businessman's heart was beating so hard he could feel the pulsations echoing in his ears. "Hey, you there!" A gruff voice cut through the night. "Where do you think you're going?" Edward didn't look back. He opened the passenger door and placed Mia on the seat, quickly adjusting the seatbelt around her small body. His hands trembled as he went around the vehicle to the driver's side. The men's footsteps approached rapidly, their voices becoming louder and more threatening. "Go, mister, go!" Mia shouted, her small fingernails digging into the leather upholstery of the seat. Edward started the engine and floored the accelerator. The tires screeched on the wet asphalt as the Mercedes shot down the avenue. In the rear view mirror, he could see 3 men running after the car for a few yards before giving up, standing in the middle of the street with clenched fists. "They have a car too," Mia said in a trembling voice, turning to look out the rear window. "An old black car. They're gonna follow us." Edward took the first turn he found, veering off his usual route. His hands were sweating as he gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline coursing through his veins like liquid fire. How long had it been since he'd felt real fear? How long had it been since anything truly affected him, besides the numbers in his bank accounts? "Mister, are you okay?" Mia's worried voice brought him back to reality. Edward looked at the girl and saw his own fears reflected in those large, dark eyes. She was scared, but there was an impressive courage in her posture. This child had risked her own life to save him, a person she barely knew, merely out of gratitude for an act of kindness. He barely even remembered. "I'm fine, Mia. You were very brave tonight." Edward tried to smile, but his hands still trembled. "On the wheel. How did you know they were going to get me today? I sleep in a cardboard box behind the bodega on Lexington Avenue. At night, when it's real cold, I hear the grown-ups talking. Yesterday, they talked about the man in the blue suit who always passes by that corner at 11:30 at night." Edward felt a chill. His routine was so predictable that even homeless people knew it. How many other people knew exactly where he would be at every moment of the day? The cell phone rang again. This time, Edward answered. "Edward, for God's sake, where did you get to? The Japanese investors have already left. You just blew the biggest deal of your life." Marcus's voice sounded desperate on the other end of the line. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully," Edward said, keeping his eyes on the road as he took another random turn. "Someone tried to kidnap me tonight. I need you to cancel all my appointments for the next few days." "Kidnap? Edward, are you okay? Where are you now?" "I'm safe, but I need to disappear for a few days. Take care of the company while I sort this out." Edward hung up before Marcus could ask any more questions. He looked in the rearview mirror again. No black car in sight, but that didn't mean they were safe. "Mister, I know a place where we can stay," Mia said softly. "It's where my mom is. She'll want to thank you personally." "Your mother? Is she really sick?" Mia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "She coughs a lot and can't work anymore. We don't have money for a doctor." Edward felt his chest tighten again. While he was closing multi-million-dollar deals, this child and her mother were fighting for basic survival. The weight of guilt and responsibility began to settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Let's go see your mother," he said, resolute. "And then we're going to the hospital. You both need proper medical care." Mia smiled for the second time that night, but Edward couldn't shake the feeling that the dangers were just beginning. The Mercedes navigated increasingly narrow streets, moving away from the financial district towards a working-class neighborhood in the Bronx. Edward had never been to this area, where houses were crammed together and street lighting was scarce. Mia guided him with precise directions, her childlike voice contrasting with the mature knowledge she displayed of every corner and shortcut. "Here, mister. Stop here," she said. pointing to a vacant lot next to a small abandoned church. Edward parked the car and looked around apprehensively. The place seemed deserted, but he could hear low voices coming from somewhere nearby. Mia jumped out of the vehicle with an agility that belied her apparent fragility and ran towards a makeshift structure made of plywood and blue tarpaulin. "Mum! Mum! I brought him!" the girl shouted before disappearing inside the precarious structure. Edward locked the car and walked slowly towards the shelter. His Italian shoes sank into the damp earth with each step. The smell of wet wood and wood smoke invaded his nostrils, so different from the air-conditioned, perfumed environment of his office. "Mia Louise, where were you? I was terrified." A woman's weak voice echoed from inside the shack. Edward stopped at the entrance, unsure if he should go in. Through an opening in the tarp, he could see a young woman, perhaps in her 30s, lying on some old blankets. Even in the dim light, it was possible to see how thin she was, her disheveled hair framing a face that had once been beautiful. "Mom, this is Mr. Edward, the man who helped us on Church Street." Mia pulled her mother's hand, trying to get her to sit up. The woman looked up and, upon recognizing Edward, tried to sit up quickly. A violent coughing fit interrupted her, doubling over her frail body. Edward hesitated no longer and entered the small shelter, kneeling beside her. "Please, don't get up. My name is Edward Mendez," he said gently. "Mia told me you're sick." "Mr. Edward," the woman whispered between coughs, "I never forgot your kindness. My name is Carmen Delgado." Her hands trembled as she tried to smooth her hair. "I'm sorry about our situation. After I lost my cleaning job, we couldn't afford rent anymore." Edward observed the surroundings. It was smaller than his walk-in closet, but was neatly organized. The few clothes were folded in a cardboard box. There was a small makeshift stove, and a few kitchen utensils were arranged on a wooden board. Despite the extreme poverty, there was dignity in that home. "Carmen, I need to tell you something important," Edward said, his voice filled with urgency. "Mia saved me tonight. There were men waiting to kidnap me, and she risked her life to warn me." Carmen looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. "Mia Louise, what did you do?" "I just wanted to help him, Mom. Like he helped us before," Mia replied, hugging her mother's legs. "Do they know it was you who warned me?" Edward asked, his stomach tightening at the possibility. Mia looked down. "I think so, mister. They saw me talking to you before we ran away." Carmen began to cry silently, her tears mixing with the sweat of her fever. "Oh my God, what's going to happen to us now?" Edward felt the weight of responsibility fall upon his shoulders like a mountain. This family had already suffered enough, and now, because of him, they were in even greater danger. He couldn't abandon them, not after Mia had been so brave. "You're not staying here another night," he said with determination. "I'm taking you to a safe place." "Mr. Edward, we don't have money to pay," Carmen began to protest. "It's not about money, Carmen. It's about doing the right thing." Edward took his cell phone out of his pocket. "I'm going to call an ambulance for you, and then we'll find a place where you'll be protected while I sort this situation out." Suddenly, the sound of an approaching engine made them all freeze. Edward peeked through the opening in the tarp and saw the headlights of a dark car stopping across the street. His blood ran cold. "They found us," Mia whispered, clinging to her mother's arm. Edward gestured for Carmen and Mia to remain absolutely silent. His heart was beating so hard he feared the sounds could be heard outside. Through the small opening in the tarp, he watched 3 men get out of the black car and talk in low voices. One of them lit a cigarette, the red ember glowing in the darkness like an evil eye. "You sure she lives around here?" asked a rough voice Edward didn't recognize. "Tony said he saw her run in this way after the rich guy took off. That brat knows where he is." The second voice sounded familiar, but Edward couldn't place it. The third man remained silent, but Edward could see his large, intimidating silhouette, outlined against the faint light from the lampposts. They began to walk slowly through the lot, examining every shadow, every makeshift structure. Carmen held Mia against her chest, her hands trembling from fever and fear. The girl's eyes were wide, but surprisingly calm for someone her age. Edward admired the courage she displayed even in such a dangerous situation. "If they come in here, run," Edward whispered softly. "I'll distract them." "No, mister." Mia shook her head vigorously. "We escape together, or we don't escape." The determination in the girl's voice touched Edward deeply. When was the last time someone had shown such loyalty to him? In the business circles he frequented, relationships were based on mutual interest and convenience. Here, in this shack of wood and tarp, he was experiencing something he had forgotten existed: unconditional love. The footsteps drew dangerously close. Edward could hear the men's voices getting louder, closer. He prepared to go out and confront the kidnappers when a familiar voice made him freeze. "Edward, I know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized men." It was Marcus. His partner of over 10 years, the man he trusted most in the business world, was outside coordinating his own capture. Edward felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. The betrayal hurt more than any physical threat. "Marcus," he muttered to himself, trying to process the devastating reality. "I heard you on the phone, Edward. I know you figured out our plan. But think about it. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." Marcus's voice sounded calm, almost paternal. "Come out of there and let's resolve this like we always resolve our problems, with a good negotiation." Edward closed his eyes, feeling tears of anger and disappointment well up. Marcus knew his routine better than anyone. Marcus had access to all his accounts, contracts, and personal information. Marcus was the perfect person to coordinate a successful kidnapping. "Why, Marcus?" Edward shouted from inside the shelter, his voice laced with pain. "Why are you doing this?" "You really want to know?" Marcus laughed bitterly. 10 years, Edward. 10 years working as your junior partner, always in your shadow. You get 60% of everything, and I settle for crumbs. Until Roger approached me with an interesting proposal. Roger. Edward remembered immediately. Roger Slade, a bankrupt businessman he had brought down in a dispute over a strategic piece of land 3 years ago. The man had lost everything and sworn revenge. Now, apparently, he had found the perfect way to get it. "Roger is paying you for this?" Edward asked, trying to buy time while looking for a way out. "Roger wants to see you destroyed, Edward, and I want my share of the empire I helped build. It's as simple as that." Marcus took a few steps closer. "Now, come out of there and bring the girl too. She's seen too much." Carmen began to cry softly, holding Mia tightly. Edward knew he couldn't hand over this brave family to those men. He had to find a way to protect them, even if it cost him everything he owned. "Mister," Mia whispered in his ear, "there's a gap behind the church. We can escape through there." Edward looked at the girl with renewed admiration. Even in that moment of terror, she was thinking of solutions. Maybe there was still hope for all of them. Edward helped Carmen to her feet, putting one of his arms around her shoulders to support her. The woman was weaker than he had imagined, her faltering steps revealing how much the illness had debilitated her body. Mia led the way, moving with the dexterity of someone who knew every inch of that territory. "Edward, you have 30 seconds to show yourself, or we're coming in there and taking you by force." Marcus's voice echoed across the vacant lot, laced with a coldness Edward had never noticed before. They moved as silently as possible around the back of the makeshift shelter. The ground was muddy from the rain, and Edward had to take off his shoes to prevent the sound of his heels from giving them away. His Italian silk socks were soon soaked and dirty, but he barely noticed. All his attention was focused on keeping Carmen upright and following Mia. The passage Mia had mentioned was a small opening in the fence, separating the vacant lot from the yard of the abandoned church. It was too narrow for an adult to pass. Through easily, but with effort, it would be possible. Edward looked at Carmen, worried about her condition. "I can do it," she whispered, reading his thoughts. "For Mia Louise, I can do anything." Mia slipped through first, gliding through the opening like a shadow. On the other side, she stood guard while Edward helped Carmen cross. The woman moaned softly as one of the fence slats scratched her arm, but she bit her lip to keep from making more noise. Edward went through last, tearing part of his expensive suit in the process. On the other side of the fence, they were in the yard of the abandoned church. The area was overgrown with tall weeds and debris, offering good cover. They could hear the men's voices on the other side, still searching. "They're not here, Marcus," said one of the unfamiliar voices. "His car's still in the same spot, but the shack's empty. Search better. They have to be somewhere around here," Marcus replied, his tense voice revealing frustration. Edward pulled out his cell phone and checked the signal. Only 2 bars, but it would be enough. He called 911, keeping his voice low. "Hello, I need an ambulance urgently. A sick woman needs medical attention." He provided the church's location, requesting discretion. While they waited for help to arrive, Edward watched Carmen struggle with another coughing fit. Her lips were slightly bluish, and he realized her situation was more serious than he had thought. Mia held her mother's hand, whispering words of comfort with a maturity impressive for her age. "Mr. Edward," Mia whispered, "my mom always said you were our guardian angel. Now I understand why." The girl's words touched Edward deeply. He remembered how he used to find satisfaction in helping others before business success hardened his heart. Looking at that brave family, he felt something awaken within him, a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. "Mia, you're the one who's been our guardian angel," he replied, gently stroking the girl's disheveled hair. "Without your courage, I'd be in those men's hands right now." The sound of approaching sirens brought both relief and apprehension. The ambulance would arrive soon, but Edward knew the kidnappers were still nearby. He needed to find a way to ensure Carmen and Mia remained safe while he resolved this situation. "Carmen," he said softly, "when the ambulance arrives, you'll be taken to the hospital. I'll give instructions for them to take very good care of you and Mia." "But what about you, sir? They're still after you," Carmen whispered, genuine concern in her feverish eyes. Edward smiled sadly. "I'll have to face this, but at least I'll know you two are safe." On the other side of the fence, the voices began to move away. Marcus and his cronies had apparently given up the search for that night, but Edward knew they would be back. The war was just beginning. The ambulance arrived with its sirens off as Edward had requested. 2 paramedics got out of the vehicle and were immediately directed by Edward to where Carmen lay, now almost unconscious from the high fever. Mia wouldn't let go of her mother's hand, her large eyes fixed on the pale face of the woman she loved more than anything in the world. "She has severe pneumonia," the more experienced paramedic diagnosed quickly after examining Carmen. "She needs to be admitted immediately." While the paramedics prepared Carmen for transport, Edward knelt beside Mia. The girl was visibly frightened, but tried to be strong so as not to worry her mother further. "Mia, listen to me carefully," Edward said softly, placing his hands gently on the child's shoulders. "You're going to accompany your mother to the hospital. I'll give my card to the doctors and tell them I'll cover all her treatment expenses. But what about you, mister? Aren't you coming with us?" Tears began to well in the girl's eyes. Edward felt his heart ache. He wanted more than anything to accompany them to the hospital, to personally ensure Carmen received the best possible treatment, but he knew his presence would put them both in danger. Marcus and his cronies wouldn't hesitate to use a child as a hostage to get what they wanted. "I have some important things to take care of first, but I promise I'll visit you tomorrow." Edward handed his business card to the paramedic. "This is my card. Please ensure the girl and her mother receive the best possible care. Money is no object." As the ambulance drove away carrying Carmen and Mia, Edward felt a strange emptiness in his chest. In just a few hours, these two people had become more important to him than many of the relationships he had cultivated over the years. For the first time in a long time, Edward Mendez had something worth fighting for besides money. He returned to the Mercedes, carefully checking his surroundings before emerging from his hiding place. The car was intact, but Edward noticed there were footprints in the mud around the vehicle. Marcus and his accomplices had examined the car while searching for them. Edward started the engine and drove towards the city center, his mind working furiously to formulate a plan. He needed to find out exactly who was involved in the conspiracy against him, how much Marcus knew about his business, and most importantly, how to protect Carmen and Mia while he resolved this situation. But first, he needed a safe place to spend the night. He couldn't go back home or to the office. Marcus knew all his addresses. He then remembered Benny, his former driver who had worked for the Mendez family for over 20 years before retiring. Benny had always been loyal and discreet, and Edward trusted him completely. The phone rang a few times before Benny's sleepy voice answered. "Benny, it's me, Edward. I need your help urgently." "Mr. Edward, what time is it? Did something happen?" "It's a long story, Benny. Can I come over to your place? I'm in serious trouble and need a safe place to spend the night." "Of course, Mr. Edward, you'll always be welcome here. Helen will get the guest room ready." Edward sighed with relief. Benny and Helen were simple, honest people who had dedicated much of their lives to serving his family. They had never asked for anything more than a fair wage and had always treated Edward with genuine affection, not the calculated interest that characterized his business relationships. As he drove through the deserted streets towards Benny's house, Edward reflected on the changes his life had undergone in a single night. He had lost trust in his best partner, discovered he had enemies willing to do anything to destroy him, and found a family that reminded him of the man he used to be. But the biggest revelation would come the next day, when Edward discovered that Marcus's betrayal was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Edward woke up in the guest room at Benny's house to the aroma of fresh coffee and homemade bread invading his nostrils. Helen had prepared a simple breakfast, but made with care, something he hadn't experienced in years in his routine of morning meetings at expensive impersonal restaurants. "Did you sleep well, Mr. Edward?" Helen asked maternally, pouring him a steaming cup of coffee. "Better than I expected, considering the circumstances," Edward replied, observing how that modest house radiated peace and warmth. "Helen, thank you for taking me in without asking questions. You've always been good to us, Mr. Edward. When Benny lost that money in the pyramid scheme, you didn't fire us. On the contrary, you helped us recover some of the loss." Edward had completely forgotten about that episode. For him, it had been just an automatic gesture of justice, but he now realized how deeply that act had affected the couple. His cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was an unknown number. "Edward, we need to talk." The voice was Roger Slade's, cold and calculating. "You ruined my life 3 years ago. Now it's my turn." "Roger, what do you want?" Edward tried to keep his voice firm, but he felt his stomach clench. "Justice, Edward. You took everything from me when you bought that land under the table. I lost my company, my house, almost lost my family. Now you're going to feel what it's like to be left with nothing." "And Marcus, how did you convince him to betray me?" Roger laughed bitterly. "Marcus came to me, Edward. Apparently, your dear partner isn't as loyal as you thought. He's tired of being your doormat and wants a bigger piece of the pie. Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of betrayal like a stone in his chest. Marcus had been like a brother. To him, all those years, they had built the business empire together, shared successes and failures, celebrated achievements at intimate dinners with their families. What do you want from me? $50 million, Edward, and the transfer of 40% of Mendez and Associates shares to Marcus. Otherwise, the three of you will meet a very unpleasant end. 3? Edward felt his blood run cold. What 3? You, the sick woman, and that inconvenient little brat who ruined our plan last night. Edward gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles turned white. If you touch Carmen or Mia, I swear I'll... You're not in a position to make threats, Edward. You have 12 hours to transfer the money to the account Marcus will send you. After that, I can't guarantee anyone's safety. The call ended, leaving Edward in a state of shock. Benny, who had observed the conversation from a distance, approached worriedly. Mr. Edward, can I help with anything? Edward looked at the man who had served his family with dedication for so many years. Benny was honest, loyal, and knew Edward better than many people in his business life. Maybe it was time to trust someone completely. Benny, I need to tell you everything that happened last night, and I need your help to protect 2 very special people. As he recounted the events of the previous night, Edward saw in Benny's eyes the same indignation he felt. The retired driver listened attentively, asking pointed questions and demonstrating a practical wisdom that contrasted with the theoretical sophistication of the executives Edward was used to consulting. Mr. Edward, Benny said when he finished his account, you need to go to the hospital to see how the woman and the girl are doing. But first, we need to find out exactly who else is involved in this. If Marcus managed to convince other company employees to betray you, the danger is greater than we imagine. Edward nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the advice, but deep down, he knew the worst was yet to come. Edward arrived at Lenox Hill Hospital mid-morning, wearing a cap borrowed from Benny and sunglasses to disguise his appearance. The establishment was known for catering to the city's elite, but also for its discretion and security. He had chosen this location strategically, knowing it would be harder for Marcus and his cronies to reach Carmen and Mia there. At the reception, he identified himself discreetly and was directed to room 412, where Carmen was admitted. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, always attentive to movements around him. His paranoia had intensified since Roger's threatening call. The room was spacious and comfortable, overlooking an internal hospital garden. Carmen was lying in bed, connected to an IV drip and a heart monitor. Her breathing seemed more regular, and a little color had returned to her face. Mia was curled up in an armchair beside the bed, still wearing the same dirty clothes from the previous night. Mr. Edward! The girl jumped from the armchair and ran to hug him, her small hands clutching his coat as if he might disappear at any moment. Hi, Mia. How's your mom? Edward stroked the girl's hair, feeling a wave of tenderness that surprised him. The doctor said she's going to be okay, but she needs lots of medicine and rest. Mia pulled him towards the bed. Mom, look who came to see us. Carmen opened her eyes slowly, a faint smile lighting up her face when she recognized Edward. Mr. Edward, you shouldn't have come. It's dangerous. I promised I'd come, remember? Edward approached the bed, observing how Carmen seemed more fragile under the bright hospital light. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you, sir. The doctors said if I had waited a few more days. Her voice failed and tears welled in her eyes. Mia Louise could have been orphaned because of me. Don't talk like that, Carmen. You two are stronger than you imagine. Edward pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. I need to tell you something. The situation has become more complicated. He recounted Roger's call, omitting only the most frightening details so as not to alarm Mia unnecessarily. Carmen listened with growing concern, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Edward, do they know we're here?" Carmen asked. "I don't think so. I used a false name for the admission and paid for everything in cash. But to be sure, I'm going to hire private security to stand guard in the hallway." A nurse entered the room, checking Carmen's machines and jotting down information on a clipboard. "Excuse the interruption. How are you feeling today, Miss Delgado?" "Much better, thank you." When the nurse left, Edward turned to Mia. "Mia, would you like some clean clothes and maybe take a shower?" The girl looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "You can go, my dear. Mr. Edward will take good care of you." Edward took Mia to the hospital gift shop, where they bought basic children's clothes, toiletries, and a few toys. While Mia showered in the room's bathroom, Edward spoke quietly with Carmen about the next steps. "Carmen, I need to ask you a difficult question. Do you have any relatives or friends you trust completely? Someone who could take care of you for a few days while I sort this out?" Carmen thought for a moment. "My sister lives in Stamford. She always said if I needed help, but I don't want to put her in danger too." "Stamford could be a good option. Far from here, but not too distant. I can arrange safe transportation and accommodation for you there." Mia came out of the bathroom wearing small jeans and a pink blouse, looking like a normal child for the first time since Edward had met her. She smiled shyly, still not used to clean, comfortable clothes. "You look beautiful, Mia," Edward said sincerely, and the girl's smile widened. But the peaceful moment was shattered when Edward saw, through the room window, a familiar black car parking in the hospital lot. Edward felt his blood run cold as he recognized the vehicle. It was the same black car from the night before, and 3 men were getting out, walking purposefully towards the hospital's main entrance. One of them was Marcus, unmistakable even from a distance in his grey suit and arrogant posture. "Carmen, I need you to listen to me carefully," Edward said softly, keeping his eyes fixed on the window. "They've found us. We need to get out of here now." Carmen tried to get up quickly, but a wave of dizziness made her falter. Edward held her gently by the shoulders. "Easy, you're still weak." "Mister, what's happening?" Mia asked, sensing the tension in the air. "Remember the bad men from last night? They're here." Edward took his cell phone out of his pocket and called. "Benny, I need you to come to Lenox Hill Hospital immediately. Enter through the back emergency entrance and take the service stairs to room 412. Bring the car." Edward hung up and turned to Carmen. "Can you walk?" "I can, Mr. Edward. For Mia Louise, I can do anything." They left the room cautiously. Edward carried Mia in his arms while supporting Carmen with his other arm. The hallway was relatively empty, just a few nurses going about their routine activities. Edward tried to look like just another visitor helping patients. They reached the service elevator when Edward heard familiar voices echoing down the main corridor. Marcus was talking to someone at the reception desk, probably trying to find out where Carmen was admitted. "We're looking for a young woman who was admitted last night with respiratory problems. She was accompanied by a small child," Edward could hear Marcus saying. The elevator doors opened, and the 3 of them quickly got inside. Edward pressed the button for the ground floor, where the back exit was located. His fingers drummed nervously as he watched the floor numbers slowly decrease. "Mister, are you scared?" Mia asked, her small hands touching Edward's tense face. "A little," Edward admitted honestly, "but I won't let anything happen to you, I promise." The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened to reveal a service corridor leading to the back exit. Edward saw Benny arriving through the outer door, his face showing concern and determination. "Mr. Edward, the car is right out here," Benny said, taking some of Carmen's weight. Helen packed some sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. They walked quickly towards the back parking lot. Benny's car was a simple but well-maintained sedan. Edward helped Carmen settle into the back seat with Mia, while he himself sat in the passenger seat. "Where to, Mr. Edward?" Benny asked, starting the engine. "Let's go to your place first. I need to make some calls and organize a plan." As they drove away from the hospital, Edward saw the black car circling the block in the rearview mirror, apparently looking for them. His heart pounded, but Benny drove calmly, taking side streets and avoiding main avenues. "Mr. Edward," Carmen said weakly from the back seat, "I don't want you to get into more trouble because of us. Maybe it's better if we just disappear." "Carmen, don't say that." Edward turned to look at her. "You two saved me last night. Now it's my turn to protect you." Mia was quiet, watching the city pass by the window. Suddenly, she pointed to a car coming up behind them. "Mister, I think that car is following us." Edward looked in the rear view mirror, and his stomach clenched. It was another dark vehicle keeping its distance, but clearly tailing them. Marcus had been smarter than he'd imagined. "Benny, they're following us. Do you know a place where we can hide?" Benny smiled for the first time since arriving at the hospital. "I do, Mr. Edward. I'll take you to a place where no rich guy in a suit will ever think to look." Benny drove the car through increasingly narrow streets, entering a neighborhood Edward had never visited. The houses were simple, packed close together, with clotheslines stretched across windows and children playing. On the sidewalks, the contrast with the luxurious world Edward inhabited was stark, but there was something comforting in that simplicity. "Where are we going, Benny?" Edward asked, watching the pursuing car disappear from view after a few sharp turns. "To my sister-in-law's house, Mama Rosa's. She's been taking care of abandoned kids for over 20 years. It's the kind of place people like your enemies would never think to look." The car stopped in front of a small but well-kept house, painted light blue with white windows. In the small front yard, several children of different ages were playing with simple toys. A sturdy woman about 60 years old appeared at the door, drying her hands on a floral apron. "Benny, what a nice surprise!" Mama Rosa smiled warmly. "And you've brought visitors." "Rosa, this is Mr. Edward, Ms. Carmen, and little Mia. They're going through some difficulties and need a safe place to stay for a few days." Mama Rosa observed the group with experienced eyes. She asked no questions, just nodded understandingly. "All the children who come here are running from something, my son. Welcome." Edward helped Carmen out of the car, impressed by the naturalness with which they were received. Mia, initially shy, was soon drawn to the other children who ran to greet her. It was the first time Edward had seen her interacting with other children, and the genuine smile that blossomed on her face moved him deeply. "Rosa, I need to use your phone to make some important calls," Edward said, "and I'd like to contribute to the household expenses while we're here." "The phone's available, but as for the money," Mama Rosa shook her head. "Around here we help each other out of love, not for personal gain." Edward felt humbled in a positive way. He was used to solving everything with money, but in this simple environment, he realized there were more important values. He watched Carmen being carefully settled into a clean, airy room, while Mia was immediately included in the group of children, as if she had always been part of the family. From the kitchen phone, Edward called his personal attorney, Arthur Feinstein Eskane, a trusted man who knew all the legal details of his business. "Arthur, I need you to urgently review all contracts and powers of attorney Marcus has access to. I suspect he's plotting something against me." "Edward, good thing you called. Marcus was here earlier today saying you'd had an accident and authorized him to temporarily take over the business. He brought a power of attorney with your signature." Edward felt the floor drop out from under him. "Arthur, I didn't sign any power of attorney. Marcus is trying to take over the company. Did you sign anything?" "I haven't signed anything yet. I was waiting to talk to you first," Edward, what's going on? A very well-planned coup attempt, Arthur. I need you to immediately freeze all company accounts and prevent any transfer of shares. Use all available legal resources. I'm already on it. Edward, where are you? The situation seems serious. I'm in a safe place, but I can't reveal where. Keep working to protect our interests and keep me informed. Edward hung up and sat at the simple kitchen table, putting his head in his hands. Marcus wasn't just a traitor, he was a sophisticated criminal who had meticulously planned to take everything Edward had worked for over the years. Mama Rosa approached and placed a warm cup of coffee in front of him. Big problems, huh, son? Bigger than I imagined, Mama Rosa. My partner is trying to steal my company while organizing my kidnapping. You know what I've learned taking care of so many hurt children? Mama Rosa sat beside him. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. Edward looked through the kitchen window and saw Mia playing Ring Around the Rosie with the other children, her laughter echoing through the yard. Carmen was on the porch watching her daughter with a serene smile, looking healthier by the hour. Maybe you're right, Edward murmured, feeling a strange transformation happening inside him. The second day at Mama Rosa's house began with Edward being awakened by shouts from the yard. He jumped out of the makeshift bed in the living room and ran to the window, only to discover they were shouts of joy from the playing children. For the first time in years, he had slept soundly, without the anxiety medication he took every night. Mia was at the center of the game, teaching the other children a song Carmen had taught her. Her eyes shone with a happiness Edward had never seen before. Carmen, sitting on the porch, watched her daughter with tears of emotion in her eyes. "How is she?" Edward asked, sitting beside Carmen. "Much better, Mr. Edward. Last night she told me this was the best day of her life." Carmen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How long has it been since she played with other children, had a safe roof over her head? Edward watched Mia run through the yard, her laughter mingling with that of the other children. The girl's transformation in just 2 days was impressive. The scared, fragile child he had met on the street had given way to a vibrant, happy little girl. The phone rang, interrupting the peaceful moment. Mama Rosa called Edward to answer. "Edward, it's Arthur. I have important news. Marcus tried to access the company accounts last night, but we managed to block it in time. Also, I found something interesting in the contracts he prepared." "What did you find?" "The signature on the power of attorney is a forgery, Edward. We have enough evidence to sue him for attempted fraud. But there's more. I discovered he's been embezzling money from the company for at least 6 months. Edward felt a mixture of anger and relief. "How much money?" "About $3 million. He created shell companies and made fraudulent transfers. I have all the documents here. Arthur, I need you to go to the police immediately. Present all the evidence and file a formal complaint against Marcus and Roger Slade for attempted kidnapping, fraud, and extortion." "Already on it. Edward, the police want to talk to you. Would it be possible for you to come to the precinct this afternoon?" Edward looked at Carmen and Mia in the yard, weighing his options. Hiding any longer wouldn't solve the situation. It was time to face reality and reclaim his life. "I'll be there at 3 o'clock. Arthur, hire a security firm to protect 2 people who are very important to me. I'll send you the address by text." After hanging up, Edward sat in Mama Rosa's kitchen, organizing his thoughts. He knew that leaving this refuge meant taking risks, but he couldn't live on the run forever. Besides, he had responsibilities to Carmen and Mia that went far beyond just protecting them. "Rosa, may I talk to the—" "Mama Rosa, may I have a moment?" "Of course, son. You look worried." "I need to go out this afternoon to sort out some problems. Is it possible for Carmen and Mia to stay here a few more days? They can stay as long as they need, but can I offer an old woman's advice?" Edward nodded, genuinely interested in the wisdom of this extraordinary woman. That girl and her mother came into your life for a reason, Edward. It's no coincidence you met them that night. Sometimes, God uses the simplest people to teach the most important lessons. Edward looked out at the yard again, where Mia was now helping a smaller child tie her shoe. The girl's maturity and kindness constantly impressed him. "You're right, Mama Rosa. They've changed my life more in 2 days than I've changed in 45 years. That afternoon, Edward prepared to confront Marcus and reclaim his life. But he knew that, regardless of the outcome, he would no longer be the same cold, calculating man he once was. Edward arrived at the police precinct, accompanied by Arthur and 2 private security guards. He had exchanged the torn suit for simple clothes borrowed from Benny, feeling strangely more comfortable in this less formal attire. At the precinct, he was met by Detective Miller, an experienced officer who had investigated numerous white-collar crime cases. "Mr. Mendez, we've analyzed all the evidence your lawyer presented. We have sufficient grounds to arrest Marcus and Roger Slade for attempted extortion, fraud, and criminal conspiracy." "Have they been located?" Edward asked, feeling a mixture of anxiety and relief. "Marcus was arrested this morning at the company office, trying to access the blocked bank accounts. Roger Slade is still at large, but we've issued an arrest warrant for him." Edward gave a detailed statement about the events of the past 48 hours, from his encounter with Mia to the threats he had received. The detective listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. "Mr. Mendez, I'd also like to speak with the woman and child who helped you. They are important witnesses in this case." "They're in a safe place, Detective. I can bring them here tomorrow, once I'm sure Roger Slade has been captured." After completing the legal procedures, Edward returned to Mama Rosa's house late in the afternoon. He found a scene that filled him with emotion. Carmen was in the kitchen, helping prepare dinner for all the children, while Mia was telling stories to the younger ones in the yard. "Mr. Edward." Mia ran to hug him as soon as she saw him. "Mama, Rosa said you went to sort out the problems with the bad men." "Yes, Mia, half the problem is solved." Edward knelt to be at the girl's eye level. "Marcus was arrested today. He won't be bothering anyone anymore." Carmen appeared at the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. "And the other man?" "He's still being sought, but the police will find him soon." Edward smiled reassuringly. "In a few days, you'll both be completely safe." That night, after the communal dinner at Mama Rosa's, Edward had a long conversation with Carmen on the porch. The children had gone to sleep, and the house was quiet, enveloped by the characteristic peace of that special home. "Carmen, I need to talk about the future for you two." "Mr. Edward, we've already made plans. As soon as I'm fully recovered, we'll go to Stamford to stay with my sister. We'll manage to get back on our feet on our own." Edward shook his head. "Carmen, you both saved my life. Mia risked everything to warn me about the danger, and you showed me who I really am beneath all that corporate coldness. We only returned the kindness you showed us 2 years ago." "It was much more than that." Edward looked through the window to the room where Mia slept peacefully. "That girl has a courage and a kindness that humbles me. She deserves every opportunity the world can offer." "Mr. Edward, what are you getting at?" Edward took a deep breath, organizing the thoughts that had been forming in his mind over the past few days. "Carmen, I would like to formally adopt Mia, and I'd like you to work with me, not as an employee, but as a partner in a new project I want to develop." Carmen was silent for a long moment, tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Edward, I want to create a foundation to help families experiencing homelessness. You understand this reality better than anyone, and Mia would truly be my daughter." The next day, news arrived that Roger Slade had been captured trying to flee to another state. With all the criminals apprehended, Edward, Carmen, and Mia's lives were finally safe again. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy night that forever changed Edward Mendez's life. The businessman stood on the porch of his new home, smaller and cozier than the mansion he once inhabited, watching Mia play in the garden with other children. The property had been transformed into the headquarters of the Hope Foundation, the project born from his encounter with that special family. Carmen approached carrying a tray of fresh lemonade, wearing a simple yet elegant dress Edward had bought for her. Her health was fully restored, and she radiated a happiness that was contagious to everyone around. "How was the meeting with the investors today?" Carmen asked, pouring Edward a glass. "Better than expected. We secured funding to open 3 more foundation units in other neighborhoods." Edward smiled, watching Mia teach a new child to ride a bicycle. "That girl has a natural gift for caring for others." "She inherited that from you, Dad," Carmen said affectionately, using the title Mia had chosen for him after the official adoption was finalized. Edward still got emotional whenever he heard that word. Dad. At 45, he had discovered that being a father had nothing to do with blood ties, but with love, dedication, and commitment. Mia had officially become Mia Louise Mendez, and he couldn't be prouder. "Carmen, do you remember what you said that first night? That I had saved you on Church Street?" "I remember." "Why?" "Now I know it was you who saved me. I was becoming a cold, calculating person, concerned only with money and status." Edward gently took Carmen's hand. "You gave me back my humanity." Carmen blushed slightly. In recent days, the relationship between them had naturally evolved from gratitude to something deeper. Edward discovered new qualities in Carmen daily: her practical wisdom, her inner strength, her capacity for unconditional love. "Dad! Carmen!" "Come see!" Mia shouted from the garden, waving excitedly. They approached and saw that the girl had organized the other children into a small theatrical presentation. Mia was playing a teacher, helping the younger ones read simple words written on colorful flashcards. Her naturalness and patience constantly impressed Edward. "When I grow up, I want to be a teacher like Mama Rosa," Mia announced proudly. "I want to teach kids who didn't get a chance to study before." Edward felt tears well up in his eyes. The girl he had found on the streets, scared and hungry, now dreamed of helping other children in similar situations. Generosity and gratitude had become the core values of her personality. "You'll be a wonderful teacher, my daughter," Edward said, hugging Mia affectionately. That night, after all the children at the foundation had dined and retired to their rooms, Edward stood alone in the garden, reflecting on the extraordinary journey he had undertaken. He had lost a treacherous partner and discovered that money, though important, was not what gave life meaning. Marcus was serving a 5-year sentence for fraud and attempted extortion. Roger had been sentenced to 7 years for masterminding the kidnapping and criminal conspiracy. Justice had prevailed, but more important than the punishment of the guilty was the transformation those events had brought about in the lives of everyone involved. Edward looked up at the starry sky, remembering that rainy night when he had almost run over a little girl on the streets. If he had known then that this encounter would completely change his life, would he have believed it? Probably not. But now he understood that life's best gifts often come disguised as problems. Mia appeared at her bedroom window, waving at him with a radiant smile before getting into bed. Edward waved back, his heart overflowing with paternal love. 3 weeks after that dramatic encounter on the dimly lit corner, Edward Mendez had discovered that true wealth was not in his bank accounts, but in the smile of a courageous child, in the love of a special woman, and in the satisfaction of using his resources to transform lives. When a small hand touched his, Edward turned and saw Carmen beside him, watching the stars with him. "Thank you," Edward whispered. "Why?" "For teaching me that gratitude and courage can transform any destiny." Carmen smiled and held his hand. More firmly, "Thank you, Edward, for showing us that kindness and love are the only investments that truly matter." In the moonlit garden, an unlikely but genuine family found the peace they had sought all their lives, knowing that the bonds, forged in adversity, are the strongest and most enduring of all.